When a successful but prejudiced businessman loses his memory in an accident, he meets a talented doctor who opens his eyes to a new way of seeing the world. But as his memories return, shocking secrets from his past threaten to destroy their growing connection. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun shone through the tall windows of the Anderson Industries headquarters as Marcus Anderson, CEO of one of the largest tech companies in America, sat in his leather chair reviewing contracts. At 45, he had everything money could buy: a penthouse in Manhattan, a collection of luxury cars, and more wealth than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. "Mr. Anderson, the board meeting starts in 5 minutes," his assistant reminded him through the intercom. Marcus gathered his papers, straightening his expensive tie. The company had just acquired another smaller firm, adding to his growing empire. As he walked through the corridors, employees lowered their heads, avoiding eye contact. His reputation for being harsh and discriminatory was well known, though carefully hidden from the public eye. The board meeting went as expected. Marcus shot down several diversity initiatives without even reviewing them, maintaining his usual stance. "We hire based on merit," he said firmly, using his standard excuse to maintain the status quo. Driving home that evening in his Ferrari, Marcus's mind wandered to the charity gala he would attend later. His PR team had insisted on it to improve his image. The roads were wet from an earlier rain, and as he approached a sharp turn while checking his phone, his car hydroplaned. The world spun around him. Metal crunched against metal as the Ferrari slammed into the guardrail. The last thing Marcus saw was the airbag deploying toward his face. He woke up in County General Hospital, his head throbbing. The doctors gathered around him, asking basic questions. "What's your name? What year is it? Who's the president?" Marcus couldn't answer any of them. His mind was blank, wiped clean by the trauma. The doctors diagnosed him with retrograde amnesia, complete memory loss of his past life. During his first week in the hospital, Marcus noticed how differently the staff treated him compared to other patients. They were professional but distant, except for one person, Dr. Maya Thompson, a brilliant neurologist who had recently joined the hospital staff. "The scans show significant trauma to the temporal lobe," Dr. Thompson explained, showing him the images. "Your memories may return gradually, or they might not return at all. We'll need to run more tests." Marcus found himself drawn to Dr. Thompson's warm smile and gentle manner. She treated him like a person, not just another patient. He didn't know why, but something about her presence made him feel at peace. What Marcus didn't know was that Dr. Thompson had faced numerous obstacles in her career. Despite graduating top of her class and having multiple publications to her name, she had been passed over for promotions repeatedly. In fact, she had once applied for a research position at Anderson Industries, but was rejected without even an interview. One day, while Dr. Thompson was checking his vitals, a group of well-dressed people burst into the room. Leading them was Richard Sterling, Marcus's longtime friend and company VP. "Thank goodness you're awake," Richard said, his relief seeming somehow artificial. "We've been worried sick. The company needs you back." Marcus felt uncomfortable with their presence. These people claimed to know him, but they felt like strangers. He noticed how they barely acknowledged Dr. Thompson, treating her with subtle disdain. "Mr. Anderson needs rest," Dr. Thompson said firmly. "His recovery is our priority right now." "Of course," Richard replied with a tight smile. "We just need him to sign some papers to keep the company running smoothly." Dr. Thompson intercepted the documents. "Mr. Anderson is not in any condition to make legal decisions. His cognitive functions need to be fully evaluated first." After they left, Marcus turned to Dr. Thompson. "Were they really my friends?" She paused before answering. "Sometimes, Mr. Anderson, losing your memory might be an opportunity to rediscover who you truly are, without past influences." As days passed, Marcus began noticing things he hadn't before. He saw how some staff members were treated differently than others. He observed the subtle ways people interacted based on their backgrounds. Without his previous biases, he saw the world through new eyes. Dr. Thompson continued to visit him daily, often staying past her rounds to talk. She shared stories about her journey through medical school, her love for neuroscience, and her dreams of opening a clinic in underserved communities. "Why hasn't anyone funded your clinic idea?" Marcus asked one evening. "It sounds amazing." Dr. Thompson smiled sadly. "Sometimes, Mr. Anderson, the world isn't ready for change even when it's needed." Little did either of them know that this was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything Marcus once believed in. even though he couldn't remember those beliefs himself. The hospital became Marcus's new normal over the next few weeks. Each day brought fragments of his old life through visitors, but none of it felt real to him. His sister Caroline visited frequently, always dressed in designer clothes and wearing too much perfume. "Marcus, darling, you need to come home," Caroline insisted one morning. "We have private nurses who can take care of you. This place isn't suitable for someone of your status." Marcus looked around the hospital room. "I feel comfortable here. Dr. Thompson says my recovery is going well." Caroline's face tightened at the mention of Dr. Thompson. "About her, don't you think it's strange that she spends so much time with you? I mean, surely there are other doctors who could handle your case." "Dr. Thompson is the head of neurology," Marcus replied, feeling defensive though he didn't understand why. "She's brilliant at what she does." "Oh, please," Caroline scoffed. "We all know how she got that position. These diversity hires always—" She stopped herself, noticing Marcus's confused expression. Later that day, Richard Sterling returned with more papers. "The board is getting anxious, Marcus. We need you to sign these documents to prevent a hostile takeover." Dr. Thompson walked in during their conversation. "Mr. Sterling, I've already explained that Mr. Anderson isn't cleared for any legal decisions." "With all due respect, Doctor," Richard said coldly, "this is business matter. You people wouldn't understand." Marcus saw Dr. Thompson's face remain professional, but her eyes showed hurt. Something about Richard's tone bothered him deeply. "I trust Dr. Thompson's judgment," he said firmly. "Please leave." After Richard left, Marcus turned to Dr. Thompson. "I'm sorry about him. I don't understand why they act this way." "It's not your fault," she said softly. "Some people hold on to prejudices so tightly, they don't even realize they have them." That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Caroline's comments and Richard's behavior. While flipping through TV channels, he stumbled upon a news report about his accident. The reporter was interviewing former employees of Anderson Industries. "The company's hiring practices have been questioned multiple times," one anonymous employee said. "Qualified candidates were often rejected for questionable reasons." Marcus switched off the TV, feeling uneasy. The next morning, he asked Dr. Thompson about his past. "I'm not sure I want to remember who I was," he admitted. "The way my supposed friends treat people, was I like that too?" Dr. Thompson sat down beside his bed. "Mr. Anderson, who you were doesn't have to determine who you'll become. I believe people can change when they open their hearts to the truth." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Marcus's personal assistant, Janet, carrying a stack of files. "Mr. Anderson, these need your immediate attention. The shareholders are calling for an emergency meeting." As Janet organized the papers, she kept shooting disapproving glances at Dr. Thompson. Marcus noticed how she deliberately placed herself between them, as if trying to establish some sort of barrier. "I brought your favorite tea," Janet said sweetly to Marcus. "The kind you always said was the only proper tea, not like the common stuff they serve here." Marcus took the cup, but didn't drink. Everything about his old life felt wrong somehow. The way these people spoke, their attitudes, their assumptions, it all made him increasingly uncomfortable. Later that afternoon, Dr. Thompson was checking his latest test results when Marcus asked her about the clinic she wanted to open. "Tell me more about your plans," he said. "Why hasn't anyone supported it?" Dr. Thompson hesitated before answering. "I've approached several investors, including Anderson Industries, but my proposals were always rejected without explanation." Marcus felt a strange knot in his stomach. "My company rejected you?" "Yes," she said quietly, "but that's in the past. Right now, let's focus on your recovery." That evening, while Marcus was alone, he found an old newspaper article on his phone. It showed a younger version of himself at a business gala, quoted as saying he believed in traditional corporate values. The article mentioned several discrimination lawsuits that had been quietly settled out of court. The more he discovered about his past, the more determined he became to be different. He started paying attention to how the hospital staff interacted, noticed the subtle hierarchies, the invisible barriers that some people faced. Dr. Thompson became his window into a world he had apparently chosen to ignore before. She told him stories about her struggles through medical school, working multiple jobs to pay tuition, facing skepticism about her abilities despite her outstanding credentials. "How do you stay so positive?" he asked her one day. "Because every day I get to help people," she replied. "And sometimes, Mr. Anderson, the biggest changes start with just one person seeing the world differently." What neither of them realized was that Marcus's family and business associates were watching these interactions closely, and they were starting to worry. Their carefully controlled world was beginning to crack, and they wouldn't let it crumble without a fight. Richard Sterling paced in his luxurious office at Anderson Industries, his face red with anger. He's spending too much time with her. This isn't going according to plan. Caroline Anderson sat in a leather chair, nervously twisting her pearl necklace. That woman is filling his head with ideas. Yesterday, he asked me about the company's diversity policies. Marcus never cared about that nonsense before. We need to act fast, Richard said, picking up his phone. Get me James Morrison from the hospital board. Meanwhile, at County General, Marcus was making remarkable progress. During his physical therapy sessions, Dr. Thompson would often stop by to encourage him. One morning, she brought him a surprise. I found something you might be interested in, she said, showing him a medical journal. It's about new treatments for memory recovery. As they discussed the article, Marcus found himself more captivated by her enthusiasm than the medical details. Her eyes lit up when she talked about science, and her smile made him forget about his frustrations with recovery. Their moment was interrupted by Janet, bursting into the room. Mr. Anderson, there's an emergency board meeting. They're voting on company leadership today. Dr. Thompson stood up. He's not ready for... Actually, Marcus interrupted, I want to attend. I need to see what's happening at my company. Against Dr. Thompson's medical advice, Marcus attended the meeting via video call. What he saw shocked him. Richard was presenting financial reports showing a sudden decline in company value. As you can see, Richard announced, we need to take immediate action to protect our shareholders' interests. I move to temporarily transfer full executive powers to the board until Mr. Anderson's complete recovery. Marcus watched in silence as his supposed friend systematically tried to strip him of his company. But something caught his attention. The numbers didn't add up. That evening, he asked Dr. Thompson for her laptop. I need to check something, he said. As he reviewed old company reports, muscle memory took over. He might not remember his past, but his business instincts were still sharp. They're manipulating the data, he realized. They're trying to take control while I'm vulnerable. Dr. Thompson watched him work, impressed by his focus. Your procedural memory is intact. You remember how to analyze business data, even if you don't remember learning it. Their conversation was interrupted by James Morrison, head of the hospital board, entering the room. Dr. Thompson, may I speak with you outside? In the hallway, Morrison's friendly facade dropped. There are concerns about your involvement with Mr. Anderson's case. Some board members feel you're getting too personally involved. My treatment methods are standard practice, Dr. Thompson defended herself. Mr. Anderson's recovery has been exceptional. Nevertheless, Morrison continued, we're transferring his case to Dr. Roberts. You're being reassigned to the general ward. When Dr. Thompson returned to Marcus's room, he could tell something was wrong. What happened? They're taking me off your case, she said quietly. Dr. Roberts will be taking over tomorrow. Marcus felt anger rising inside him. This isn't about medical care, is it? They're trying to separate us. Mr. Anderson, please, he interrupted. Call me Marcus. Their eyes met and something unspoken passed between them. Before either could say more, Caroline walked in with a tall, gray-haired man in an expensive suit. Marcus, this is Dr. Roberts, Caroline said sweetly. He'll be handling your care from now on. He's from our country club, much more suitable. Marcus looked between Dr. Roberts's smug expression and Dr. Thompson's dignified silence. No, he said firmly. Excuse me, Caroline blinked. I said no, Dr. Thompson stays as my doctor. If she goes, I'm leaving the hospital today against medical advice. How would that look in the press? Caroline's face turned pale. You wouldn't dare. Try me, Marcus challenged. And while you're at it, explain why the company's quarterly reports show different numbers in the public filing versus the board presentation. Later that night, after everyone had left, Dr. Thompson came back to check on him one last time before her shift ended. Thank you, she said softly, but you didn't have to do that. Your recovery is what's most important. My recovery includes keeping the one person I trust, Marcus replied. Besides, I have a feeling I've let too many injustices slide in my past, not anymore. What they didn't know was that Richard was already implementing his backup plan. In his office, he opened a file labeled Thompson Meyer and smiled coldly. Let's see how our righteous doctor handles a little scandal. The storm clouds were gathering, and soon everyone would have to choose sides in a battle that would expose the ugly truths lurking beneath the polished surface of Marcus's world. The morning headlines hit like a bombshell. Questions arise about doctors' credentials at County General. The article, published in a major newspaper, suggested that Dr. Maya Thompson had falsified parts of her medical background. Marcus read the article with growing anger. The claims seemed ridiculous. Allegations about a fake diploma, questions about her research papers, and suggestions of misconduct with patients. "This is absurd," he said, when Dr. Thompson entered his room. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept. "The hospital board is launching an investigation," she said quietly. "They've suspended me pending the results." "This has Richard's fingerprints all over it," Marcus growled. "The timing is too perfect." But worse was yet to come. That afternoon, Janet arrived with a thick folder. "Mr. Anderson, I thought you should see this. It's about your past dealings with Dr. Thompson." Inside the folder were documents that made Marcus's heart sink. 3 years ago, Dr. Thompson had applied for a research grant at Anderson Industries. The rejection letter was cold and dismissive, despite her outstanding proposal, but it was the internal memo attached that made him feel sick. "We don't need her kind complicating things here," the memo read in his own handwriting. "Find an excuse to reject it." When Dr. Thompson came to check on him that evening, Marcus could barely look at her. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "Tell you what? About the research grant, about how I treated you?" Dr. Thompson sat down slowly. "Because that person doesn't exist anymore, at least not right now." "But he did exist," Marcus insisted. "I did those things. I hurt people. I hurt you." Before she could respond, Richard burst into the room with 2 security guards. "Dr. Thompson, you're being escorted from the premises. The board has concerns about patient safety." "This is ridiculous." Marcus started to get up, but Dr. Thompson raised her hand. "It's okay," she said calmly. "The truth will come out." As she was led away, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since waking up in the hospital. A memory, brief but crystal clear. Himself laughing with Richard at a country club, making cruel jokes about the staff, dismissing a discrimination complaint with a wave of his hand. The memory made him nauseous. While nurses checked his vital signs, he heard Caroline and Richard talking in the hallway. "Perfect timing with that article," Caroline said. "Who knew journalists could be so cooperative when properly motivated?" "Money talks," Richard replied. "Now we just need to keep him away from her long enough to get those papers signed." Marcus waited until night fell. When the nurse came to check on him, he asked for his phone. "Just want to check some emails," he said innocently. Instead, he called Mary Chen, a junior reporter he'd seen around the hospital. "I have a story for you," he said, "about how Anderson Industries really operates." The next morning, a new headline appeared. "Whistleblower exposes systematic discrimination at major tech company." The article detailed years of biased hiring practices, complete with leaked emails and internal memos. Richard rushed to the hospital in a panic. "What have you done?" he demanded. "No, Richard, what have you done?" Marcus replied. "I remember enough now. I remember the meetings where we'd find excuses not to hire qualified candidates. I remember the jokes, the comments, the subtle ways we kept people down. It stops now." "You're making a mistake," Richard warned. "Think about your reputation, your legacy." "My legacy," Marcus laughed bitterly. "My legacy is shame. But I can change that." He pressed the call button, and when the nurse arrived, he asked for his laptop. As Richard watched in horror, Marcus began drafting an email to the entire company. "I'm calling an emergency board meeting," he announced. "And Dr. Thompson will be there." "You can't be serious," Caroline had arrived, clutching her designer handbag like a shield. "Think about what people will say." "They'll say I finally did something right," Marcus replied. "Now get out, both of you. I have a lot of damage to undo." That night, alone in his hospital room, Marcus looked at his reflection in the window. The face looking back at him was the same, but the person behind it was changing. His phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Thompson. "Just saw the article. Are you okay?" Her concern, even after everything she'd learned about him, broke something inside him. Tears rolled down his face as he typed his reply. "No, but I will be. We have a lot to talk about." Outside his room, the night shift nurses whispered about the drama unfolding in room 412. None of them could have guessed that this was just the beginning of a story that would shake the foundations of Anderson Industries and force everyone involved to confront the ugly truth about prejudice, power, and the possibility of redemption. The Anderson Industries boardroom was unusually full that morning. Board members shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs as Marcus, now strong enough to attend in person, sat at the head of the table. Dr. Thompson sat beside him, her head held high despite the whispers and stares. "The first order of business," Marcus announced, is to address the false allegations against Dr. Thompson. He placed a stack of documents on the table. These are her original credentials, verified by 3 independent sources. The newspaper has already printed a retraction. Richard's face turned red. Marcus, you're not thinking clearly. Actually, Richard, I'm thinking clearly for the first time in my life. Marcus pressed a button, and a series of emails appeared on the boardroom screen. These messages show how you and others conspired to create false accusations against Dr. Thompson. The police are very interested in them. Caroline stood up, her voice shaking. You're choosing her over your own family? I'm choosing what's right, Marcus replied. And if you were really family, you'd want me to be a better person. The board meeting lasted hours. By the end, Richard and 2 other board members had resigned. Caroline stormed out, declaring Marcus was no longer her brother, but the most important vote passed. A complete overhaul of company policies, starting with hiring practices. Later that evening, Marcus and Dr. Thompson walked through the hospital garden. His recovery had progressed enough for short walks, though she insisted he use a cane. You didn't have to do all this, she said softly. Yes, I did. Marcus stopped by a bench. But there's something else you need to know. More memories are coming back and they're not pretty. He told her about a talented young doctor who had applied for the company's medical research division 5 years ago. How he had personally blocked her application because of her race, then laughed about it with Richard over drinks. That was you, he said, his voice breaking. You applied twice before, didn't you? And I ruined your dreams without even meeting you. Doctor, Thompson was quiet for a long moment. Yes, that was me. I needed that grant to start my clinic. How can you even look at me? Marcus asked. Knowing what I did? Because that man wouldn't be sitting here now, trying to make things right. She touched his hand gently. The past matters, but so does the present. Their moment was interrupted by James Morrison rushing toward them. Dr. Thompson, the board has reversed your suspension. All charges have been dropped. But Morrison wasn't finished. There's more. An anonymous donor has pledged $10 million to fund your clinic proposal. Dr. Thompson looked at Marcus, who shook his head. It wasn't me. I wanted to, but I knew you wouldn't accept it from me. It was us, a voice said. They turned to see a group of Anderson Industries employees, led by Janet. We took up a collection from the settlement money. It seemed right that your dream should come from the people you helped bring justice to. Janet stepped forward, tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry for how I treated you, Dr. Thompson. Working for Mr. Anderson, I thought I had to act a certain way, be a certain person, but watching you stand up to everyone, it gave me courage. That night, alone in his hospital room, Marcus watched the evening news. His story was everywhere. The racist CEO who lost his memory and found his conscience. Some praised him as brave, others called him a traitor to his class. His phone hadn't stopped ringing with calls from old friends and business associates. Most were angry or disappointed. A few suggested he needed psychiatric help, but for the first time in his life, or at least the part he could remember, he felt at peace with himself. Dr. Thompson knocked on his door. Your latest scans came in. Your memory recovery is progressing faster than expected. I'm scared, he admitted. What if I remember more terrible things? What if I become that person again? She sat on the edge of his bed. Memory isn't just about the past. It's also about what we choose to do with it. Just then, his phone buzzed with a news alert. Richard Sterling had called a press conference. On screen, his former friend stood at a podium, his face twisted with anger. Marcus Anderson is destroying everything we built, Richard declared, and I have proof that his relationship with Dr. Thompson is more than professional. She's manipulating him for her own gain. Marcus reached for the remote to turn it off, but Dr. Thompson stopped him. No, she said. We need to watch this. We need to know what we're up against. As Richard continued his accusations, Marcus felt a new memory surface. A conversation from years ago where Richard had suggested using similar tactics to discredit another doctor who had filed a discrimination complaint. I remember how to fight back against this, Marcus said grimly. I just never thought I'd be using those skills to do the right thing. Dr. Thompson squeezed his hand. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones most worth fighting. Outside the hospital, reporters gathered like vultures, waiting for the next development in the story. But inside room 412, two people who should have been enemies sat together, planning how to build something better from the ashes of prejudice and privilege. Richard Sterling's press conference had the exact effect he'd hoped for. Within hours, tabloid headlines screamed, "Hospital romance gone wrong?" and "Doctor takes advantage of amnesiac millionaire." Dr. Thompson tried to maintain her professional demeanor at work, but the whispers followed her everywhere. Some patients even requested different doctors after seeing the news. "Maybe I should take a leave of absence," she told Marcus during his morning checkup, "until this blows over." "That's exactly what they want," Marcus replied, "to drive you away like they've done to others before." Another memory had surfaced, of other talented professionals who had left the company after similar smear campaigns. The hospital board called an emergency meeting. Dr. Thompson stood before them, her back straight despite the hostile stares. "These allegations are affecting patient confidence," Morrison said. "We need to consider what's best for the hospital." "What's best for the hospital?" Marcus walked into the room using his cane. "Let's talk about that. Dr. Thompson has the highest patient recovery rate in the neurology department. Her research has brought in millions in grants. But you're ready to throw her away because of lies?" "Mr. Anderson," Morrison shifted uncomfortably, "given your condition and your past relationship with the hospital as a donor, perhaps you should sit this one out." "My condition?" Marcus laughed. "You mean the condition that Dr. Thompson has been successfully treating? The same doctor you're trying to push out?" Before Morrison could respond, Janet burst into the room. "You need to see this," she said, turning on the television. Caroline Anderson was on screen, giving a tearful interview. "My brother isn't himself," she sobbed. "This doctor has completely changed him. The Marcus I know would never betray his friends, his family, his values." "Your values," Marcus muttered, disgusted. He turned to the board. "You want to know the truth? I'll give you the truth." He pulled out his phone and played a recording. It was Richard's voice. "Plant the story about her credentials. Make it dirty. If that doesn't work, we have other options." Marcus was always good at making problems disappear. The room fell silent. Morrison's face had gone pale. "That's how we operated," Marcus continued. "Destroy anyone who didn't fit our narrow view of who deserved success. I remember it all now. Every cruel decision, every life we ruined, and I'm done with it." He turned to Dr. Thompson, who was watching him with an unreadable expression. "I know this is unprofessional, and you can report me to the board if you want, but I need to say this. I'm falling in love with you. Not because of my amnesia, not because you're my doctor, but because you showed me what real strength and integrity look like." Gasps filled the room. Dr. Thompson's eyes widened. "Mr. Anderson," she started, but he held up his hand. "Please let me finish. I don't expect anything from you. How could I after what I did? But you deserve to know that you didn't just heal my brain. You helped heal my heart." Morrison stood up, sputtering. "This is highly irregular." "No," Dr. Thompson interrupted. "What's irregular is how this hospital, like so many institutions, bows to pressure from wealthy donors instead of standing up for what's right." She turned to Marcus. "I'll need to transfer your care to another doctor, not because of these accusations, but because I have feelings for you too, and that's not appropriate for a doctor-patient relationship." The news that evening was chaos. Some outlets praised Marcus's transformation, others questioned his mental stability. Richard appeared on multiple shows, painting himself as a concerned friend, trying to save Marcus from manipulation. But something unexpected happened. Hospital staff began coming forward with their own stories of discrimination they'd witnessed or experienced. Former Anderson Industries employees shared similar accounts. What was meant to be a scandal about one doctor and her patient became a national conversation about privilege, power, and change. Late that night, Marcus sat in the hospital garden with his new doctor's permission. Dr. Thompson, Maya, as he could now call her since she was no longer his doctor, found him there. "Your new scan results came in," she said, sitting beside him. "Your memory recovery is almost complete." "I know," he replied. "I remember everything now. Every cruel word, every biased decision." He looked at her. "How can you even stand to be near me?" "Because I also see the man who risked everything to make things right," she said. "The question is, what happens now?" Before Marcus could answer, his phone rang. It was his lawyer. "Turn on the news," she said urgently. "Richard's playing his last card." On TV, Richard stood at another podium, this time with a group of former Anderson Industries executives. "We have evidence," he announced, "of Marcus Anderson's history of racist decisions and actions. He's trying to paint himself as a changed man, but we believe the public deserves to know the truth about his past." Maya watched Marcus's face as he viewed the broadcast. "They're trying to use your own past against you." "Yes," he said quietly. "And maybe they should. Everything they're going to reveal, I did those things. I was that person. The key word is was." Maya touched his hand. "The real question is, who are you now?" Marcus looked at their intertwined fingers, his pale skin against her dark skin. Once this simple touch would have been unthinkable to him. Now it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "I'm someone who needs to make this right," he said. "Not just for us, but for everyone I hurt. And I think I know how." As they sat in the garden planning their next move, neither noticed Caroline watching from a distance, her expression torn between anger and uncertainty. The war for Marcus's soul and for the future of Anderson Industries was about to enter its final phase. The morning shows were having a field day with Richard's revelations. Videos surfaced of Marcus's old speeches, emails were leaked showing discriminatory decisions, and former employees shared stories of his past behavior. "Anderson Industries CEO's racist past exposed," the headlines screamed, but Marcus wasn't hiding. Instead, he called a press conference at the hospital. "Everything they're saying about my past is true," he announced, standing at the podium with Maya beside him. "I was that person. I made those decisions. I hurt countless talented people because of my prejudices." The reporters fell silent, not expecting this admission. "But losing my memory gave me a gift, the chance to see the world without hate, to meet people like Dr. Thompson and judge them only by their character and abilities. I'm not asking for forgiveness, I'm asking for the chance to make things right." He unveiled his plan, a complete overhaul of Anderson Industries. 50% of board positions would go to minorities. A billion-dollar fund would be established to support minority-owned businesses. And most shocking of all, he would step down as CEO, recommending Maya for the position of Chief of Innovation and Medical Research. The room exploded with questions. Richard, watching from his office, threw his phone against the wall. "He's destroying everything," he shouted at Caroline. "We have to stop this." But Caroline wasn't listening. She was watching her brother on TV, seeing something in his eyes she hadn't seen in years: peace. At the hospital, Maya confronted Marcus after the press conference. "You can't give me that position," she said. "People will say I manipulated you into it." "Let them talk," Marcus replied. "Your credentials speak for themselves, and besides, I have another surprise." He showed her a document on his tablet. It was a list of every person who had been denied opportunities at Anderson Industries due to discrimination. Next to each name was a personal apology letter and an offer of compensation or a new position. "I remember them all now," he said softly. "Every person I hurt, every dream I crushed. This is just the start of making it right." But Richard wasn't done fighting. That afternoon, he called an emergency shareholder meeting, trying to force a vote to remove Marcus from the board entirely. "He's mentally unstable," Richard argued to the shareholders. "The accident changed him. He's not fit to make these decisions." The vote was close, but something unexpected happened. Janet stood up in the middle of the meeting. "I've worked for Mr. Anderson for 10 years, she said, her voice shaking. "I saw everything. I helped him maintain his prejudice system because I was afraid of losing my job. But now," she pulled out a stack of documents, "these are the real company records, showing how much talent we lost because of discrimination, how much money we wasted fighting lawsuits instead of embracing change." The shareholders' vote failed. Richard stormed out, but not before making one last threat. "This isn't over, Marcus. You think your little confession protects you. I have worse things to reveal." That evening, Maya found Marcus in his hospital room, packing his things. He was finally being discharged. "Richard's right," he said, without looking up. "There are worse things in my past, things I'm only now remembering." "Like what?" Marcus sat heavily on the bed. "I remember a young intern at the company about 5 years ago. Bright, ambitious. She filed a harassment complaint against one of our top executives. I didn't just ignore it. I had her blacklisted from the entire industry. I destroyed her career to protect the old boys club." Maya sat beside him. "Have you found her? For your apology list?" "That's just it," he said, his voice breaking. "She gave up her dreams, moved away. No one knows what happened to her." Maya took his hand. "Then we'll find her. Together." But before either could say more, Caroline burst into the room. Her face was streaked with tears. "Marcus, you need to see this," she said, handing him her phone. On the screen was a private investigator's report, detailing Richard's secret plans to take over the company. Plans that had been in motion long before Marcus's accident. "He's been embezzling money for years," Caroline explained, "using it to buy shares through shell companies. He was going to take control whether you had your accident or not. I helped him because I believed in keeping things the way they were. But watching you change, seeing you fight for what's right, I can't be part of this anymore." Marcus looked at his sister. seeing real regret in her eyes for the first time. "Help me fix this," he said simply. Caroline nodded, wiping her tears. "Richard's called another press conference for tomorrow. He's planning to reveal something big, something he says will destroy you completely." Maya squeezed Marcus's hand. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." As night fell over the city, 3 people sat in a hospital room, planning how to confront the dark legacy of wealth and privilege that had poisoned their world for so long. Outside, reporters camped in the parking lot, waiting for the next bombshell in a story that had captured the nation's attention. And somewhere in the city, Richard Sterling opened a safe and pulled out a file labeled Marcus Anderson, Personal. His face twisted into a cruel smile as he began to read. Richard Sterling's press conference was set for noon at the Waldorf Hotel. News vans lined the street, and reporters packed the grand ballroom. Marcus, Maya, and Caroline watched from a side room as Richard took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard began, his face grave, "what I'm about to share isn't easy, but as someone who has known Marcus Anderson for 30 years, I have a responsibility to reveal the truth." He held up a thick folder. "These documents show that 15 years ago, Marcus Anderson personally blocked the construction of a medical center in a predominantly minority neighborhood. A center that would have provided crucial health care to thousands of underprivileged families." Maya felt Marcus stiffen beside her. "Is it true?" she whispered. "Yes," he said, his voice hollow. "But there's more. He knows there's more." Richard continued, his voice dripping with fake concern. "The land was instead used for luxury condos. But that's not the worst part." He paused for effect. "The doctor who proposed the medical center, Dr. William Thompson, Maya Thompson's father." The room erupted in gasps. Maya's face went pale. "Your father?" Marcus turned to her, horrified. "The proposal I rejected, that destroyed his life's dream. He died 2 years later," Maya said quietly. The rejection broke him. He'd spent everything he had on that proposal. Richard's voice boomed through the speakers. "Dr. Thompson claims to have forgiven Marcus, to believe he's changed. But how can she forgive the man who destroyed her father's dream, who contributed to his death, unless she's been playing a longer game of revenge?" Photographers' cameras flashed as Maya ran from the room, tears streaming down her face. Marcus tried to follow, but his newly healed leg slowed him down. "Maya, please, let me explain." She turned to face him in the hotel corridor. "Explain what? How you crushed my father's dream? How your prejudice didn't just hurt careers, it destroyed lives?" "I didn't know," Marcus pleaded. "I didn't make the connection. Because you never cared enough to learn the names of the people you hurt." Maya's voice broke. "My father spent 30 years serving that community. He saw children die because they couldn't get proper medical care. That center was his answer, his legacy. And you killed it for what? More luxury condos." Caroline caught up with them, breathing hard. "Marcus, Richard's not done. He's about to—" But Richard's voice was already echoing through the corridor speakers. "And now, the final proof of Marcus Anderson's true nature. A recording from just 3 years ago at his private club." Marcus's blood ran cold. He remembered that night. His own voice filled the air, slightly slurred from expensive whiskey. "These people need to learn their place." Thompson had some nerve, thinking he could build his charity case clinic in our neighborhood. "I made sure he'd never practice medicine in this city again. Had to protect our property values, right, boys?" Cruel laughter followed. Maya pressed her hands to her ears, but couldn't block out the words. "That's how you handle them," Marcus's past self continued. "Hit them where it hurts. Their dreams, their hopes. Crush those, and they'll stay in their place." The recording ended. Maya looked at Marcus with eyes full of pain. "All this time," she said softly, "I thought the accident had revealed your true self, but maybe it just hid who you really are. And now you remember everything." "Maya, please." Marcus reached for her hand. "That man in the recording, he's dead. The accident didn't just take my memories, it freed me from years of learned hate. But the damage he did lives on," she replied, pulling away. "My father died thinking he was a failure, that he'd let down his community. His last words to me were, 'I'm sorry I couldn't make a difference.'" Caroline stepped forward. "Maya, I know we have no right to ask anything of you, but Marcus really has changed. Help him prove it." Maya wiped her tears. "I need time and space." She turned to Marcus. "Don't follow me." As she walked away, Richard appeared at the end of the corridor, looking triumphant. "Well, well," he smirked. "Looks like the dream romance is over. Ready to come back to reality, Marcus?" But Marcus wasn't looking at Richard. He was staring at the hotel's directory board, specifically at the listing for the Grand Ballroom. Something clicked in his mind. "Caroline," he said suddenly, "get me everything you can find about that medical center proposal, and call Janet. I need the original land development files." "What are you thinking?" Caroline asked. "That it's time to truly make things right," Marcus replied. "Not just with words, but with actions." As he walked back toward the press conference, he could hear Richard taking questions, painting himself as the conscience of Anderson Industries. But Marcus had stopped listening. His phone buzzed. A message from Maya. "My father used to say that true redemption isn't about forgetting the past, but about building a better future. Prove him right." Marcus squared his shoulders and pushed open the ballroom doors. The cameras turned to him, and Richard's smile faltered. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced, "I'd like to tell you about Dr. William Thompson's dream and how I'm going to make it finally come true." The cameras flashed as Marcus stood at the podium, his face showing both determination and remorse. 15 years ago, I destroyed a dream," he began. "Dr. William Thompson had a vision, a state-of-the-art medical center that would serve thousands of families who desperately needed care. I killed that dream because of my prejudice and greed." He gestured to a large screen behind him, which showed architectural plans. These were Dr. Thompson's original designs: a 50-bed hospital, emergency care, free clinics, community health programs, everything a neighborhood needed. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "Today, that land holds luxury condos that most local residents can't even afford to walk past." Richard tried to interrupt, but Marcus continued. "So here's what we're going to do. Anderson Industries is buying back every single one of those condos at double their market value. We're going to tear them down, and on that land, we're going to build Dr. Thompson's medical center, exactly as he designed it." The room erupted in chaos. Reporters shouted questions. Richard's face turned purple. "You can't do this," he yelled. "The shareholders will be pleased to know that I'm personally funding the entire project." Marcus cut him off. $500 million of my own money, not company funds, mine." Caroline stepped forward with a stack of documents. "We've already contacted most of the condo owners. They're thrilled with the buyout offer. Construction can begin within months." Marcus turned back to the cameras. "But this isn't just about building a hospital. It's about honoring a man who saw what his community needed and tried to help. Dr. William Thompson died thinking he was a failure. Today we prove he was ahead of his time." He revealed the next slide, a massive medical complex with the words, "The Dr. William Thompson Memorial Medical Center," across the front. "And this is just the beginning," Marcus continued. "We've identified 20 other communities across the country where similar projects were blocked by prejudice and greed. We're going to build medical centers in every single one of them." In her apartment across town, Maya watched the press conference on TV, tears streaming down her face. Her phone was flooded with messages from former colleagues of her father, all sharing memories of his dream. Back at the hotel, Marcus wasn't finished. "Richard Sterling thought exposing my past would destroy me. He's right about one thing. I was a horrible person, but he's wrong about why I've changed. It wasn't just the accident. It was meeting people like Maya Thompson, who showed me what real strength and integrity look like." He looked directly into the cameras. "Maya, I know you're watching. I can't undo what I did to your father, but I can make sure his dream helps thousands of people, the kind of people he spent his life trying to serve." Richard stormed the podium. "This is a publicity stunt. He's trying to save his reputation." "No, Richard," Marcus replied calmly. "I'm trying to save my soul." He turned back to the reporters. "And speaking of saving things, I have some interesting documents about Mr. Sterling's financial dealings to share." Caroline stepped forward again, distributing files to the press. Richard's face went from purple to pale as he saw the headlines forming in real time. Sterling's embezzlement scheme exposed. As security led a protesting Richard away, Marcus made one final announcement. "The new medical center needs a chief of medical operations. Someone with vision, integrity, and a deep understanding of community health needs." He held up a folder. "These are Dr. William Thompson's personal notes about his dream for the center. His daughter, Dr. Maya Thompson, is the only person who truly understands his vision. The position is hers if she wants it." In her apartment, Maya stared at the TV, her father's old medical bag clutched in her hands. Inside was a worn notebook where he'd sketched his original plans for the center. The same plans now displayed on the screen behind Marcus. Her phone rang. It was Marcus. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said softly when she answered. "I'm not even asking for another chance. I'm asking you to help me make your father's dream come true, to show the world he was right all along." Maya looked at her father's notebook, then at the TV where Marcus stood, looking more humble and human than any billionaire she'd ever seen. "My father used to say that a dream isn't just about buildings and equipment," she finally replied. "It's about the heart behind it." "Then help me put the right heart into this project," Marcus said. "Not for me, for him, for the community he wanted to serve." There was a long pause before Maya spoke again. "The original plans included a free medical school scholarship program for minority students," she said. "Is that still part of it?" Marcus smiled for the first time that day. "Check your email. I've already set up a $100 million endowment for the Dr. William Thompson Scholarship Fund." Outside the hotel, reporters swarmed around Richard as police led him to a waiting car. Caroline, supervised as assistants, carried boxes of evidence against him, and in her apartment, Maya opened her father's notebook to a page she knew by heart. On it, in his careful handwriting, was written, "Dreams don't die. They just wait for the right time to bloom." 2 years later, a crowd gathered outside the newly completed Dr. William Thompson Memorial Medical Center. The morning sun glinted off its modern glass walls, and a gentle breeze rustled through the memorial garden, where the building's namesake statue stood. Maya straightened her blazer as she prepared to address the audience. As chief of medical operations, she had overseen every detail of the center's construction, making sure it stayed true to her father's original vision. The past 2 years had been transformative. Richard Sterling was serving time for embezzlement. The Anderson Industries board had been completely restructured, now reflecting the diversity of the community it served. And Marcus had proved that actions speak louder than words. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maya began, her voice strong and clear, 15 years ago, my father stood on this very spot with a dream. Today, we're making that dream reality." She gestured to the building behind her. "This isn't just a hospital. It's a promise to our community. Free healthcare for those who can't afford it. Medical school scholarships for minority students. Research facilities focused on diseases that affect underserved populations. Everything my father envisioned and more." In the front row, Caroline dabbed at her eyes. Next to her sat Janet, now the company's chief of human resources, leading their reformed hiring practices. Behind them were faces that would have been unimaginable at an Anderson Industries event just a few years ago, people of all backgrounds, united in purpose. "But before we cut the ribbon," Maya continued, "I want to share something my father wrote in his journal the night after his proposal was rejected." She pulled out a worn notebook. He wrote, "They think they've killed my dream, but dreams are like seeds. They can lie dormant for years, waiting for the right conditions to grow." She looked up at the crowd. "The right conditions aren't just about money or buildings. They're about people's hearts changing, about society growing, about learning to see each other as human beings, not categories." Marcus watched from the side of the stage, using a cane. His leg had never fully recovered from the accident, but he considered it a reminder of his transformation. In the past 2 years, he had dedicated himself to making amends, not through grand gestures, but through consistent action. Maya's voice grew stronger. "This medical center is more than my father's dream coming true. It's proof that change is possible, that redemption is real, that it's never too late to right a wrong." She turned and gestured to Marcus. "Mr. Anderson, would you join me?" Marcus walked slowly to the podium, his face showing surprise. This wasn't part of the planned ceremony. 2 years ago, Maya addressed the crowd again. "This man stood in a hotel ballroom and promised to make my father's dream come true. Many thought it was just damage control, a PR stunt. But since then, he hasn't just built this center. He's funded 19 others across the country. He's created scholarship programs, changed corporate policies, and most importantly, he's shown that true change comes from the heart." She turned to Marcus. "My father also wrote something else that night. He wrote, 'Forgiveness isn't about forgetting the past. It's about believing in a better future.'" She took his hand. "I believe." The crowd erupted in applause as Maya and Marcus cut the ribbon together. As people began touring the facility, Marcus pulled Maya aside to a quiet corner of the memorial garden. "I have something to tell you," he said. "I'm stepping down as CEO." "What? Why?" "Because there's more work to be done. I'm starting a foundation, the William Thompson Initiative. We'll identify other communities that need medical centers, other dreams that were denied because of prejudice, And he hesitated. I'm hoping you'll help me run it. Maya looked at him carefully. As a partner, in every way, he replied softly. If you'll have me. Before she could answer, a commotion arose from the center's entrance. A group of teenagers rushed out, excitedly waving papers. Dr. Thompson, one called out. We just got accepted into the scholarship program. We're going to be doctors. Maya's eyes filled with tears as she watched their excitement. This was what her father had dreamed of. Not just a building, but a future. She turned back to Marcus. Partner, she said, taking his hand. In every way. That evening, after the crowds had gone, Maya and Marcus walked through the quiet halls of the medical center. They stopped at a wall displaying a large photograph of Dr. William Thompson smiling in his white coat. He would be proud, Marcus said softly. Not just of the center, but of you. He would be proud of you too, Maya replied. He always said that the measure of a person isn't in never falling, but in how they rise after they fall. Marcus looked at her. I love you, Maya Thompson, not despite our past, but because you helped me build a better future. I love you too, Marcus Anderson, she smiled. Now let's go change more lives. Outside, the sun set behind the medical center, its windows glowing with promise. On the memorial garden wall, Dr. Thompson's words were inscribed in bronze. Dreams don't die. They just wait for the right heart to bring them to life. And in the growing darkness, two people who should have been enemies walked hand in hand, proving that love, forgiveness, and redemption aren't just the stuff of dreams. They're the forces that can change the world, one heart at a time.